Hello and welcome back to the Canadian Film Fest. My name is Mark Ishodi. I'm one of the programmers here, and I am joined by the filmmakers from Fufu and Tenzin to talk about their films. Um, to start off, Lola, I would love to hear from you about how the Fufu project came about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Fufu project started actually with me documenting a few young African women on their sort of journeys and they're beginning to create homes for themselves within Canada. I know, especially in terms of migration, you migrate with your family, you migrate with your people that you call home. So, in a very intimate, it's oftentimes a very intimate experience. And what actually happens when you depart from that sort of generational home or initial home that you've come over to Canada with. So I had a lot of conversations in terms of that documentation. The film was actually called Prodigal, initially starting with that documentary. So it was just a really open conversation on motherhood, on fatherhood, on our relationships with our parents, but also our relationships with tradition and culture, and
Mm.
how those things at times divert or change as we grow up and we start to claim our personal identity and who we consider ourselves to be. So I would say it began with like sort of like looking for the different connections, but also the kind of differences that exist within, because I myself, I'm a young African woman. So kind of the connections that I see within my story, but also the differences that I saw within other people's stories and how it came to be that they began to understand themselves, but also tradition and culture. And then that blossomed into Fufu eventually, and creating this kind of very intimate, but also singular and uh, definitive, immersive portrait of a young African woman who is going through this personal interior conflict within within traditions and cultures that she has previously been immersed into, while also attempting to begin her journey and her separate and individual journey of her life. So,
Right.
yeah.
I'm glad you articulated all that so well because it connects so nicely to Tenzin and the reason why we decided to pair these films. Um, Joshua and Michael, you guys are the directors on this film, but interestingly, you also have story by credits for a lot of the actors, including Tenzin and Chimmy. So I would love for you to start by talking about what that collaboration was like because it's a film that's so specifically about one community.
Who would you like?
Josh, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Um, well, I think thanks for having us. And I understand the pairing well. I think there was an initial impetus to make, well, I'll just speak about my own experience and then what became of the film. I'm a Dharma practitioner, and it's specific to another culture besides my own, Tibetan Buddhism. And within that, there's multiple sects, and it's a whole complex conversation about that. But it's inherently, derives from another culture than my own. Um, and then there was living in Toronto, an awareness of that the Tibetan culture in diaspora and its struggles and its relationship to like the urban experience in that diaspora, which I traced to my own experience with immigrant parents and saw something. But as a Dharma practitioner with obvious things we know about Buddhism, respect for all sentient life and these big ideas of compassion and things that occupied my mind and my own practice. There was an incongruence in some ways with what I saw as I'd heard about with the violence and tension in the community and a relationship to the self-immolation. So that was the jump off for this is a good story. This is a real story and a personal story in some ways, but not my own,
Mm.
And so then in working with and immediately wanting to go investigate and have a relationship with the actual people in the Tibetan community, it became clear that it's not our story to write and tell. And yet we're interested in telling and writing the story. So it's a collaborative work from the beginning, and the actual story wasn't like, we want to graft this story onto your experience or your experience should be grafted onto our motivations. It became this dialogue that just continued, where the authorship becomes really amorphous. And it's very hard to credit our movie, actually. I don't even know how to discuss how we wrote this film. We have to do it for the sake of, movie conventionality. But in reality, it's just people making something. And this is what came of it. And we all have these particular skills. We learned about filmmaking through it. We learned about story, self, community, etc. So it's very hard to credit other than realizing that we were all in a discovery together.
Right, fantastic. I would love to hear from Tenzin and Chemi a little bit. As far as I understand it, these were your first film roles. So Tenzin, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Hey everybody. Just so you know, I might lose connection or anything, because I'm on the road right now. But yeah, anyways, so for me, I mean, like, this is my first time ever doing acting in a film, so it was a different experience for me, it kind of gave me a hope of like, like a pathway to another career possibly, but yeah, it was a whole different experience for me. It was fun, and meeting a lot of new people. That was the best part. And then also Josh and Michael. Yeah.
And Chemi, can you add anything to that? What was the experience like for you?
For sure. Thank you for having us once again. And I wanted to say that, I've been in this project for quite a long time. I think I was quite a young person. I was in my late teens, playing badminton at the community center, and I saw auditions, and I jumped into the audition thinking, oh, well, let's try something new. Lo and behold, that was almost a decade-long chapter of conversations and really coming together and collaborating with the movie makers, the filmmakers, and crafting the story that we've created. And it's an ongoing story. As Josh was saying earlier, there's so many complexities in terms of the communities that exist. And when Josh and partners had, the idea at the beginning, and then, all these other players came in between, it was great because it was, again, a work in progress. It was never like a finalized script. There was constant collaboration, communication about what should this story be and how can it best support the community. And, we came up with this. And I think, we're very happy that it has finally come together. So oftentimes we didn't see the end of the tunnel, but I'm really happy that it has come together and we are here to get together today to be able to celebrate it.
Fantastic. I want to talk about the cinematography of both the films a little bit. Lola, for Fufu, the one of the things that stands out so much about it is the cinematography, and so much of it is an extreme close-up, which gives everything like a really wonderful texture. Can you talk about the visual treatment of it and why you decided to approach it that way?
Yeah. I had a lot of conversations with my DOP, Justin Black, about sort of this intended texture of the film. I think especially I wanted it to be an immersion within this kind of journey, especially because so much of film is about, film is gaze and the power of gaze and the power of spectatorship. And I thought it was essential to really ensure that the audience didn't have an opportunity to objectify, didn't really have an opportunity to perhaps turn away from the interiority or the complicated interiority of the protagonist. And also, I wanted it to be a little uncomfortable because I think especially within this journey, the protagonist, her name is Ife, she really doesn't come to a sort of conclusion about tradition and culture, or a conclusion about her mother's life, or what she feels that is definitive about it, or kind of the finale to it, I would say. So I think especially pairing it with the monologue allowed the audience, but also allowed me as a director to ensure that I was with her in this journey, and I was able to almost focus on just the listening aspect and allowing it to be a patient journey in itself, rather than like taking something that, you know, is incredibly intimate in its like process and taking it as, you know, looking for the morale of the story. And I feel like that was the intention with the piece. I also thought it was, you know, significant that a lot of in terms of documentary or kind of like visual references, we used a lot of photos, or we often had these conversations around photos and archives. As a consequence, I think that just like thinking, we were always thinking about like this film is kind of like just capturing this like short moment within a person's life, or these kind of like just like small processes that we go through daily. So we thought of it kind of like a photo in a sense, and how most photos are up close and personal because of the person who is behind it, which is especially family photos, or when you're trying to take capture of a moment that is like a familial moment or sort of like a home moment. Oftentimes it's in a close-up, so it's important that, you know, we were in sort of closeness with her. So yeah, I think that was kind of our approach to the film.
Fantastic. Michael, I'd love to hear from you a little bit. You know, if I understand correctly, you're primarily a cinematographer, but you were co-directing on this as well, you know, which inevitably means that you have a much bigger hand in it. So I'd love to hear about, you know, how you approached the look of the film and sort of the anxieties that you're looking at as part of the story.
When we got together, oh, nice to meet you and everyone as well. When Josh and I got together, I had just finished a film, a music video actually in Romania that I spent 7 days doing, and it was really, really lo-fi, and it was basically just me and with a couple of other friends. And we spent a lot of time just location scouting, and we spent a lot of time just making sure that we were in the right place at the right time. So with this movie, I was like pretty inspired by that experience, and so was Josh. Like, I showed him the video, and I think it was initially the reason why we went into the visual direction that we went into, because we started this project a really long time ago, like probably like 10 years ago, when Josh initially came with the idea. And like we were saying before, you know, like Josh and I sort of like wrote something, but it ended up just being, I'm just like commenting a little bit about your earlier question, it ended up just being like a starting point. Like it was like a starting point with a couple of pieces, but then when we integrated the community, it ended up actually, we just ended up being like playing the puzzles of their stories. And I believe like the entire process worked that way. So the puzzle of me going to Romania and making that film, we loved the look of it, and we decided that, yes, let's just continue on. And our main motive was, let's make Toronto look like something that it hasn't looked like before. Let's show a version of Toronto that would be like coming from ideally a perspective that hasn't, an angle that hasn't really been captured. And we really, our cinematography was like, basically the idea was mostly just like incorporating as much of Jameson as we possibly could, and just sort of like digging our teeth into that. But I mean, color-wise, Josh always had an interesting palette. He wanted to like stand true to the Tibetan colors, and we did utilize those colors. Cinematically, we wanted it to feel like almost like a documentary, but it was feeling, but actually not be a documentary almost. And most of the shots and most of the situation and locations were live events. And we went into these events with the help of the TCCC and the help of all of the Tibetan community that allowed us in to like document their events. And then we found the story after. We just went to these events. So a lot of the cinematography was just like again, just trying to be wide lens and close, and not be long lens and far. We wanted to be close with the subject. Yeah, that's about it. I don't know, Josh, you want to add on that?
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I mean, it was always a juggle, I felt, and I think Mike really pulled it off, where we're like, okay, we're making a narrative film that has no initial narrative. The narrative is evolving as the events and as the information through the characters is displayed or relayed in real time. There's so many moving pieces that converge and abut against each other. How do you visually represent something super intimate that has no predetermined intimate outcome? So you're finding, so what are you looking at when you look at someone's eyes and face? Are you pulling something? Are you pushing at them? Are they even the subject that's going to be emoting the most at the moment? So Mike found a weird or amazing, I think, balance where it has this super cinematic quality that looks very intentional. And yet, as he just said, we're finding story and we don't know what's happening in about half the movie's events. Then we have more staged mise en scène type, like, you know, movie making. Blending that took actually years of editing on Michael's part since then. So what looks intentional from an initial space is found, not found in the footage, is found all along. So I don't know how he did it.
I'll just say one last thing on
impressed.
that, Josh. I'll just say one last thing because I want to move on to your next question so we can move past this. But like, we did a bunch of scripts. Josh and I did like 2 or 3 scripts, the different people involved. And then finally, when we went shooting, we realized that the script, you know, obviously was flawed because we had never written a script. But then I ended up having this editorial idea where I wouldn't be on their mouths very much, and I'd be like always cutting away. So we were able to rewrite the script while we were editing. So that saved it. And to this day, Chemi and I, for example, we have a meeting after this, and she's just helping me translate the movie a little bit better. And to this moment, she's telling me things, which I'm going to share with you, Josh, obviously. Like, it changes the movie. It changes the feeling, what they are actually saying. We don't, like, we had it translated by someone that their English wasn't as strong as Chemi's. So now she's like, oh, actually, this is what they're saying. It's interesting. This puzzle is continuing. It's like, it's not done. And it's such a beautiful piece that way. Anyway,
it's continuing to evolve. That's great. We're just about out of time, but I want to bring Brian and Julie in here. Maybe you guys can talk about, you know, you watch a movie like this and you can just imagine the challenges that are inherent to it. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys, you know, just before we wrap up, about, you know, what were some of the more difficult things you encountered in putting everything together.
Julie, I guess I'll go first. I mean, trying to produce a scripted film over 10 years is challenging in its own right. It presents its own sets of challenges, like in every facet of the filmmaking process. But I mean, really, we didn't have that healthy of a budget. It was not a super robust budget for a film this size. It was a sort of a lower, you know, lo-fi sort of micro budget film. So it really was just collaborating with people. They were bringing us into their homes, and in many cases, you know, providing food. And yeah, I don't know, like, what do you think, Julie? Like,
I'll just say the Tibetan community did all that. Like,
it
they
was
were
amazing.
providing the food, they were providing their homes, they were like helping us in every possible way.
Yeah, it was never at any point, it never felt uncomfortable. It was challenging, but it never felt, the challenges didn't feel terrible. They were great challenges. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Julie? What did you?
I think, hello, everyone. I think that, you know, the challenges of, because I've done a few micro budget feature films and also just micro budget short films, and the challenge that's kind of consistent in that space is, like, you're trying to make art, but you're also trying to honor your collaborators. And it becomes very difficult to do that when you don't have resources, when you don't have the resources to properly compensate people, and to, like, you know, so it was just always a struggle to be like trying to do right by our cast and our crew who were coming out for low rates, and just like to make it all come together. But you know, my approach always with producing is that I really care about my collaborators, and I want to protect them, and I want to give them the tools to do their job the best that they can. So, you know, there's, you know, there, like, I'm sure you can tell from this long process that we've been on, there's been challenges throughout the entire road, but just like going back to that kind of those initial, you know, I think we had like a 16-day shoot broken over 2 chunks. It was always that. It was like, how do we like make our day and, you know, get Josh and Michael what they need on camera, but also how do we do it in a way that's like really respectful to the people who are like lending their locations, and, you know, they're tenants in a building, and, you know, how do we navigate that with their landlord, and just be really, really respectful with like nothing.
And it does feel, I mean, as you said it, there are some moments in the film that feel like documentary, and Josh and Michael approach the film in some ways, you know, with that in mind. And one of the challenges of Shirley was constantly taking an unscripted hat off and putting a scripted hat on, and basically every day you're filming some scenes that are scripted with non-professional actors who are amazing, who are doing this for the first time, and then you're also truly filming documentary scenes. So that was a bit of a trick, just, you know, basically filming a documentary and a scripted narrative at the same time. And that was a little bit new for me. It was truly like a hybrid approach. And it's something that I think was thoroughly enjoyable to make. Although it was challenging, it was a great experience.
Amazing. Well, on that note, I want to thank you all for being here, for sharing your films with us. And hopefully we'll see you again in person before too long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Sit back, relax, witness the greatest. Don't get back.